Erceg was robbed.
Steve Erceg absolutely won that fight. He looked amazing in the stand-up against Pantoja.
Steve Erceg was the better striker. He did way more damage in that fight.
This is not a controversial take. There should be no counter-argument for this take.
Is there an argument for him on the scorecards or no? Because
does anyone think Erceg won? No one does, right?
The fans are out there. They've all got their thought process as to whether it was Pantoja that should have had his hand raised. How did you score it? And did you agree with what came back our way?
If you have read the scoring criteria of MMA...
When you think about the criteria, when you think about the damage, the dominance, the duration...
What we know from the judging criteria is damage trumps all with the striking, but grappling is also going to count.
You know that Steve Erceg was robbed.
I don't.
Okay.
I thought it was a very close fight.
So I don't even really think there is an argument because I think...
It would have to be a very generous argument.
I wouldn't have been shocked if they had given it 48-47 to Erceg just because of that round 3, the cut opening up.
I felt like Alexandre Pantoja almost threw up on the stool after being concussed by one of those elbows.
Purely off of damage, Steve Erceg trumped Pantoja.
Especially with the elbow that was landed in that round and the damage done.
I'm just going to say, even with that, I still think Pantoja is the rightful winner.
I wasn't confident either way going to the scorecards, but I think Pantoja was the rightful winner.
This was the worst title fight decision since John Jones versus Dominic Reyes. At no moment in this fight did Alejandro Pantoja commit damage to Steve Erceg.
Erceg had by far the most damaging shot.
He did way more damage.
Purely off of damage.
A ton of damage.
The damage,
all the damage,
the damage,
and the damage.
Damage.
Ladies and gentlemen, after 5 rounds, we go to the judges' scorecards for decision. All 3 judges score this contest 48-47 for the winner by unanimous decision, Mateusz Gamrot
выигрывает 48-40.
MMA scoring is vibes-based. My friend reached that conclusion immediately after the scorecards for Mateusz Gamrot versus Arman Tsarukyan were read. I wasn't convinced at the time, but I definitely felt his frustration. Arman had clearly landed the more damaging shots throughout the fight and brought Gamrot closer to being finished, even dropping him with a spinning back fist in round 3, yet he still lost the round and ultimately the fight. My friend pointed out to me that since Tsarukyan looked more tired, the judges scored the fight against him, concluding that the only criteria the judges could possibly be using were entirely based on vibes. I still wasn't convinced, but I did have to admit that he had a point. Throughout the sport of MMA, we constantly hear that fights are scored off of damage. The person who landed the more damaging strikes should always win. However, time and time again, this has been proven to not always be the case. There have been countless contests that, when picked through with a fine-tooth comb, it is clear that the wrong guy got his hand raised if you are scoring purely based on damage.
Purely off of damage, Steve Erceg trumped Pantoja.
Many of these errant scorecards are chalked up to ineptitude on behalf of the judges, brought about through either poor training or critical errors of judgment. We do have to keep in mind that the judges are only human. Mistakes do happen. They are scoring it in real time and don't have the benefit of being able to go through every single strike, evaluating the impact it had on the receiving fighter like YouTubers do. But with such an important job, we demand excellence, and whenever there's a high-profile, questionable decision, there's understandably a large public outcry followed by intense scrutiny over the judges' choices and a conversation about the scoring rules of MMA in general.
And this is the age-old question we get to every single time. What is the value of grappling without close submission attempts or a ton of damage?
This mostly comes at points when a striker loses a close fight to a grappler. Makhachev versus Volkanovski 1, Tsarukyan versus Gamrot, and even Gane versus Ngannou are all fights where the grappler was awarded the decision, but was heavily criticized by pundits and fans alike for not doing enough damage and being incorrectly awarded points for control time. That brings us to UFC 301, with Alexandre Pantoja being cut open and eating massive elbows and hooks in his fight against Steve Erceg. A strike-by-strike breakdown of the fight clearly shows Pantoja received more damaging blows than Erceg did throughout the fight and on a round-by-round basis. When analyzed this way, it looks like all evidence is pointing to the judges giving the incorrect scorecards, robbing Erceg of winning the flyweight title, and once again incorrectly awarding points to the grappler for control time. But what if I told you that the judges are actually right? Let's take a step back and look at the rules of MMA scoring. Big John McCarthy famously helped write the rules of MMA, and in 2016 was a big part of an update to the unified rule set, which, among other things, greatly affected the judging criteria.
Hello everyone, I'm John McCarthy, Mixed Martial Arts official, and I'm here to talk to you about some of the new regulations that are coming to mixed martial arts with the new unified rules that have been adopted this year. For a long time, we have had a judging criteria that came from 1999. I was one of the ones that wrote it, and I've always said for a long time, it's antiquated, it needs to be changed. Well, we're trying to change it for our judges now.
The judging criteria was changed from valuing aggression and control time to now valuing damage above all else.
Who is doing the most to impact the fight and to bring a fight to the end? That's what we're looking for. A lot of people are going to look and say it's damage. We can say it's impact damage. We're looking at the word of impact as our most important element in you giving credit in the fight.
However, the New Jersey and other state commissions at the time didn't like the use of the term damage for political and legal reasons, so the language was sanitized for the official rules release and the word damage was edited out and replaced by impact. This was a political change made on paper to make the sport seem less violent, but behind the scenes, judges, referees, commentary teams, and everyone else involved in the sport were all taught that the word impact is actually just a placeholder for damage. And over the years, since this 2016 rules change, this is seeped out into the MMA ecosystem and is now accepted fact. By now, MMA fans are almost obnoxiously aware of this damage trumps all rule. You can scroll through internet comments whenever a wrestler beats a striker in a close fight and be greeted with different forms of the same critique. All he did was hold him down. He didn't deal any real damage. Control time isn't scored, damage is only scored. And the conversation inevitably devolves back into grappling versus striking and what the rules say about how to score a fight. So what is going on here? The fans know it, the pundits know it, even the fighters know it. Did the judges not get the memo that damage is to be scored above all else? To answer this question, we need to do a deep dive into the official scoring criteria. The first big thing that many people don't realize is that effective grappling and effective striking are scored on the same level. Striking is not supposed to be held above grappling in importance of score, but they're to be looked at simultaneously and given the same weight of importance when judging round.
There's only two elements that we want you to judge off of as far as your initial judging of the fight. That is striking and grappling. That's what we're looking at. That's what we want you to judge the effectiveness of who is the better at either one of those two elements.
This makes sense. It is, after all, mixed martial arts, and it would stand to reason that a grappler should be awarded points for effective grappling, just as a striker is awarded points for effective striking. But what is effective grappling? Well, the unified rules of MMA define effective grappling as the following: successful execution of takedowns, submission attempts, reversals, and the achievement of advantageous positions that produce immediate or cumulative impact with the potential to contribute to the end of the match, with the immediate weighing more heavily than the cumulative impact. It is essentially saying that grappling techniques such as submissions, takedowns, reversals, and advancing your position are all scored on the same level as striking. With the more potential a technique has to finish the match, the more it will be scored. Seems simple enough. However, the very next sentence in the rule set complicates this simple definition. It shall be noted that a successful takedown is not merely a changing of position, but the establishment of an attack from the use of the takedown. Top and bottom position fighters are assessed more on the impactful/effective result of their actions, more so than their position. At first read, this makes it seem that position is irrelevant, and the only thing that matters is what the fighter does with their position. Many fans and analysts seem to believe that this delineation instructs the judges to only score the ground and pound and submission attempts that a wrestler achieves and ignore the rest of the grappling altogether. However, on closer inspection, this attack-only view of grappling is confusing, because if the only thing the judges should be looking at is the ground and pound and the submission attacks during wrestling exchanges, as so many people seem to think, then why even mention grappling techniques at all? Why doesn't the MMA rulebook simply ignore grappling altogether and let it be its own reward, something that is used to gain an advantageous position that allows a fighter to land better quality strikes on their opponent, similar to how striking defense is treated? The judging criteria could simply say that tight submission attempts are to be scored, as well as strikes on the ground. Yet, after going so far as to mention specific grappling techniques, clearly the scoring criteria means to factor in grappling. This statement is, after all, in part defining what a takedown is and expecting the judges to score it. But over the years, this confusing definition of effective grappling has led many MMA fans and pundits to believe that damage from strikes is to be held in such a high importance, to the extent that the act of grappling itself falls almost into irrelevancy in their minds. Islam Makhachev takes Volkanovski's back for 3 minutes, It doesn't matter. Show me the damage. Alexandre Pantoja got over 5 minutes of control time throughout the fight. It's irrelevant in the face of Steve Urseg's elbows. Clearly, there is a disconnect between the judges and the fans when it comes to the relationship between damage and grappling. But who is right, and what can explain the confusing wording of the unified rules' definition of effective grappling?
We have to always remember that takedowns don't mean anything unless they do something with it. Top control means absolutely nothing. Control time means absolutely nothing. None of this is even scored unless it's used to potentially finish the opponent or get closer to doing so, which didn't happen too often, other than getting the positions.
What is the value of grappling without close submission attempts or a ton of damage?
I think the answer might lie in the original unedited 2016 rules update before the political changes. Let's see how the original's definition of effective grappling differs from the politically sanitized version. Effective grappling is assessed by the successful executions and an impactful/damaging result coming from takedowns, submission attempts, achieving an advantageous positions, and reversals. Top and bottom fighters are assessed more on the impactful/damaging result of their actions, more so than their position. When we compare this to the edited version, successful execution of takedowns, submission attempts, reversals, and the achievement of advantageous positions that produce immediate or cumulative impact with the potential to contribute to the end of the match, we see an almost word-for-word copy, except with the use of the term damaging replaced with the more sanitized potential to contribute to the end of the match. Without this change, the definition of effective grappling is much more succinct and clearer. The rules want grappling to be scored, but they want it to fall under the category of impactful/damaging grappling, not just someone laying on top of their opponent throughout the fight.
When it comes to the ground, same thing. Who's going after submissions? Who is putting his opponent in dangerous positions where they have to defend to get themselves out?
This makes it seem easy. All we need to do now is find out what the definition of damaging/impactful grappling is. But then this section ends and we are never provided with a true definition. This is where we need to dive even deeper into the rules. If you continue to read the unified rule set, the very next section is a description of the 10-point must scoring system, and it includes the definition of a 10-9, 10-8, and 10-7 round scores. The criteria for a 10-8 round score is where it gets interesting. It turns out that in order to score a 10-8 round, a fighter must achieve at least 2 out of the following 3 attributes: dominance, duration, and, our word of the day, damage.
When you think about the criteria, when you think about the damage, the dominance, the duration.
Lucky for us, here they define each of these terms. Damage. A judge shall assess if a fighter damages their opponent significantly in the round, even though they may not have dominated the action. Damage includes visible evidence such as swellings and lacerations. Damage shall also be assessed when a fighter's actions, using striking and or grappling, lead to a diminishing of their opponent's energy, confidence, abilities, and spirit. All of these come as a direct result of damage. When a fighter is damaged with strikes by lack of control and or ability, this can create defining moments in the round and shall be assessed with great value. And we can compare this to the edited rule set's definition of impact. Impact. A judge shall assess if a fighter impacts their opponent significantly in the round, even though they may not have dominated the action. Impact includes visible evidence such as swelling and lacerations. Impact shall also be assessed when a fighter's actions, using striking and or grappling, lead to a diminishing of their opponent's energy, confidence, abilities, and spirit. All of these come as a direct result of impact. When a fighter is impacted by strikes, by lack of control and or ability, this can create defining moments in the round and shall be assessed with great value. When you go back and look at the original definition, it turns out that damage isn't merely defined as the sheer amount of newtons of force you can deliver to your opponent, but rather how your actions affect their energy, confidence, abilities, and spirit. And yes, if a fighter's grappling diminishes any of these qualities in their opponent, this is directly counted as damage and is to be scored on the same level of importance as damage from strikes. When we define damage in this way, we start to get a clear understanding of why judges score rounds the way they do. It begins to make sense why we see judges giving rounds to the fighter that grappled aggressively and outpaced their opponent. So when a fighter looks more exhausted or broken as a result of their opponent's grappling, it is literally written in the rules that that exhaustion should be counted against them. This scoring style is fairly abstract, leaving it open to the interpretation of the judges as to which fighter did more to diminish their opponent's energy, spirit, confidence, and abilities each round. But it does make sense. Strike-by-strike scoring is a fun thing to do, and it makes for a great YouTube video, but it is neither a reasonable method to do in real time, nor does it accurately depict the full story of the fight. This soft rubric of scoring fights, while not as objective as picking through the fight strike by strike, offers a more well-rounded and all-encompassing lens to judge the fight through. At the end of the day, fighters are competing for the attention of the 3 people sitting cage side in charge of scoring the contest. And to go back to the scoring criteria, when a fighter is impacted by strikes, by lack of control and or ability, this can create defining moments in the round and shall be assessed with great value. Fighters must strive to create these defining moments as much as possible to impress the judges if they want to win rounds. So when we go back and look at the Pantoja versus Erceg fight, it's not so shocking now to see how the judges could have given Pantoja rounds 3 and 5. Pantoja is the king of no-selling massive strikes he receives, and is it really that unbelievable that the judges believed Erceg was more impacted by Pantoja's actions than Pantoja was impacted by Erceg's? It's not about who technically landed the most strikes, who attempted the most submission attempts, or who absorbed the most newtons of force. It's about which fighter is able to use their effective striking and or grappling to diminish their opponent's confidence, drain their energy, reduce their abilities, and extinguish their fighting spirit. Or, in other words,
For the winner, by unanimous decision, Mateusz!
scoring is based off of vibes. Thanks for watching, everyone. This has been a video that I've wanted to make for a long time, as the rule set of MMA is extremely confusing. I thought that finding the original rules and the original definition of damage was super interesting, and I hope that you did too. I really want to just tell you all how much I appreciate you watching my content, love the community that we're building here. Please like, comment, subscribe if you want more content like this, and everyone, have a great day.
Erceg had by far the most damaging shot.
He did way more damage.
Purely off of damage.
Commit damage.
A ton of damage.
The damage.
All the damage.
The damage.
And the damage.
Damage.
Damage.